Hello, I'm Rory, and I want to welcome you to the American Pets Alive webinar, Getting to Yes, Making Great Matches Between Pets and People. Today, we have some great speakers. Clare Callison is the Canine Lifesaving Advisor for American Pets Alive, Maddie's Lifesaving Academy. Before teaching the Austin no-kill model to students, Clare was the Director of Operations for San Antonio Pets Alive for 5 years, where she managed the life-saving teams, including intake, medical, adoptions, transport, data, and the mass marketing of urgent dogs on the euthanasia list. Nikki Harris is the Chief Operating Officer of Jacksonville Humane Society. She brings more than 15 years of animal welfare education and experience to Jacksonville. She joined Jacksonville in 2012 to serve as the adoptions manager at First Coast No More Homeless Pets, where she oversaw the city's first mega adoption events, which are now standard practice in both Jacksonville and other no-kill cities nationwide. Please submit questions throughout today's presentation and we'll make time to answer them at the end. Thanks so much, Clare and Nikki, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is Nikki Harris. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Jacksonville Humane Society in Jacksonville, Florida. Today we're here talking about open adoptions, and one of the first things that we talked about is how did we get there? And I've been doing this for a long time, and so I remember the days many years ago where we were not doing open adoptions and we had a lot of restrictions, and so I did have to take a look in the mirror and decide that for the agency that I was with at the time that it was time to start breaking down those barriers. And what did it for me was simply stats. The numbers don't lie. The numbers of animals that leave alive and the number of lives that we were saving or that we could save by doing open adoptions is what got me and the rest of my team there at that time.
And this is Clare Callison. I'm the Maddie's Canine Life-Saving Advisor for American Pets Alive. For me, in my history working at the City of San Antonio Animal Care Services, I started as an adoption counselor, and where the adoption room, where we did all the adoptions, was located in the morning. The dogs that didn't have placement, either foster, rescue, or adoption, with a high intake of 31,000 a year, when I first started, the live release rate was only at 28%. And so you can imagine how many dogs and cats were not leaving alive. And so it took a while for me to make the connection, but as the dogs, super friendly, wagging their tails, would actually be walked to euthanasia, but they had to come through our room first. So as I'm getting ready for my day and getting ready to do adoptions, I was actually seeing the lives and the eyes and the wagging tails of the dogs that were going to be put down just for lack of a live outcome. And so that really just hit home for me of how can we do better? How can we stop all of these roadblocks, and how can we reach more adopters? So one of the things that I learned through that process is it wasn't just enough to sort of break down barriers and allow people to kind of walk through the kennels and find the dogs on their own, but also reaching out to them. So more proactive adoptions, and Tux here is one of the ones that I remember from 2012. It's a good success story of getting his photo out there. So doing social media blasts. At the time we were using Craigslist to bring in adopters, anything we could do to just spread the word and show their faces. So not just relying on people shopping the kennels and kind of walking through, but reaching them where they were at. And it was that urgency that I saw every day that just pushed me to embrace this model. All right, so I think the first thing we really need to do is just be honest with ourselves. At Austin Pets Alive, people come and learn from our model, but I'm always first to tell them that we're not perfect either. We're in trouble if we kind of question our practices every day and say, we're doing everything perfectly, but we really need to focus on every day, what are our roadblocks to adoption? I don't know a perfect organization out there. We always can improve. So being aware is the first step. And so looking at your blanket policies, you might have been trained from day one, this is what we do. We have an approval list, we have a deny list, you might have a do not adopt or do not foster list, or blanket policies of things your organization will never do. So some of the things that we see across the country of organizations having these blanket policies, things like we don't adopt out pets as gifts, or we will never adopt out a dog if they say they want them to be an outdoor only dog. We call landlords 100% of the time, and if they don't allow a pet or they deny, then that's part of our approval process. They would be denied in that case. We require every adopter to have vet proof. So we look at everyone's vet records, or we're going to call their clinic to see that their pets are up to date. If they can't provide that information, then they would get denied. So some of these things, we have other examples, such as we require big dogs to always live successfully. They have to have a fenced in yard to live successfully. Or we always require a meet and greet with resident dogs, or every member of the family has to be present to adopt. So these are blanket policies, but if they sound familiar, you're not alone. Lots of organizations have these, but it's really important to just question every single one of them. First of all, where did they even come from? Are they from an antiquated process 10 years ago or 15 years ago that was in your shelter or your rescue organization, and no one's ever bothered to really look that they're doing any good? So always question these. And every adopter should really, and every foster should be treated as an individual. And we always say use data and facts. So we're going to look at the studies and not that one or two cases that kind of stick out in our minds. So we're not using our fears to make placement decisions, but we're looking at the studies that have been done and the facts that are actually out there. So the numbers don't lie. We're going to just take a few minutes and look at some of the myths and then know the studies too. So look at the studies as well, and why we have these policies in place. And we, at the end of this, will make sure that you guys have a list of all of these so you can easily cite them and look a little bit closer online if you'd like. So the first one, the first myth that is very common in shelters, and this might be very familiar to all of you, that animal shelters and rescue organizations, we control whether or not people get pets. So we control, if we deny an adopter, we deny a foster, you know, the thought is they'll go home and we kind of, you know, we did our due diligence, we did a good job. But what we look at when we see the data, this is from HSUS for Pets for Life survey, dogs and cats, of where people are getting their pets from. So you'll see that the yellow little chart here, that's family and friends. That makes up the majority of where people are getting dogs and cats. Then from there, we see pet store, free roaming or found, pets litter, a breeder, 7%, feral cats, that would be for cats, and then we're that little small blue section, 3%, shelter or rescue. I always look at this chart and this graph and I think about, it's like looking at Earth from space sort of thing. So we think we're everything, but actually we're just a very small piece of the pie. I hear a lot too that we've saturated our community. There's not enough fosters out there. There's not enough adopters. But when we actually look at the numbers of the people that we have in our community that we're not reaching, and we look at nationally, we see the stat, it's approximate about 1.5 or 2 million shelter pets are not making it out alive of shelters each year due to not having a live outcome. What we see is we actually have the people to solve this problem. So it's not a matter of lack of people, a lack of fosters, lack of adopters. It's just we're not reaching them. For those 3% of people that come into our shelters, if we're making them jump through every hoop and having all these checks on them, and then they're leaving and then just getting a dog or cat somewhere else, we haven't really furthered our mission and we're not making any forward progress. So our responsibility, knowing that data, knowing the study is out there, and just understanding that sort of myth of control. A lot of the things that we do, all these checks we have, our 20-page adoption or foster applications, it's sort of giving us a false sense of control. But the truth is that there's tons of animals out there. They're available. If you're not looking for a pet, how many of us have found one, or they wandered up to our doorstep, or friends or families that we know that have gone to a breeder or a pet store to acquire a dog or cat. They don't go through all these landlord checks. They're not getting, their vet called when they're trying to find a dog or cat. So that's what we're really up against. And also too, knowing that, every visitor should walk away. We're really educators at this point. They should be a better pet owner. We should come from a place of no judgment, because if we're only reaching about 3% of people, we want to make sure that the process is nice and comfortable, that they feel welcome and not judged. And then therefore we can educate on some of the more important things, such as spay-neuter resources and vaccinations and the importance of heartworm prevention, for instance. I've heard of another blanket policy of we don't foster or adopt out dogs dogs or cats to pets or to homes with pets that are unaltered. That's a common policy that's sort of around in the shelter world. And that one is tough because when we look at the control issue and that most people are going to go to another source, if we now deny them of adopting a dog or cat from us that's fully vaccinated, up to date on preventatives, and is altered, if we deny them that, there's a really good chance they're going to go somewhere else and get an unaltered animal. And now what have we done for our cause? We've potentially now created the chance of another litter being brought to a shelter, or multiple litters coming in. So got to think about the big picture and our sort of false sense of control that we have. So myth number 2, we're going to look at a study. This one is from Maddie's fund at this point, the Matchmaker Adoptathon. So you guys have heard this probably before, that, you know, if you can't afford an adoption fee, you shouldn't have a dog or a cat. But waived adoption fees don't mean that adopters will not value their pet as much. That's the myth out there. So we look at the study, we see that 95% of cats and 93% of dogs were still in the home after a waived fee adoption event. And when we look at 2 groups, so those that paid an adoption fee and those that didn't, there was no difference in pet attachment or post-adoption lifestyle or even perception of the adoption event between the 2 groups. So they looked at attachment level, were people more attached or less attached, and then whether the dog or cat was still in the home. And then of course, did they sleep on a bed? They looked at, did they go to a vet clinic? And then did you feel that the adoption agency even cared about their dogs or cats because they were doing a waived fee? And all of these sort of myths that are out there, they've been debunked by multiple studies, and this is the main one that we look at. This is a very common one. So myth number 3, pets as gifts will be valued less and then just returned. So we hear that a lot, especially around holidays. You know, don't do pets as gifts. We're going to have a bunch of January returns. That's sort of a fear that's out there. You might remember that one return that happened after the holidays. But when we look at the big picture and we look at the data, that's actually not true. So it doesn't mean with this policy that we just don't treat adopters as individuals. So somebody coming in that hasn't really done their due diligence, they may not have consulted with their mom or dad if they even wanted a pet, we're going to ask questions. It doesn't mean that we have a blanket policy that we always say yes to pets as gifts, but it just means having a conversation with that person that it actually is the right time to adopt and getting away from saying we never do this. So when we look at the study, this time it's from the ASPCA. They did a study on what happened to pets that were adopted as gifts afterwards, where they just returned. And what they found in their study is that 97% of respondents, they thought receiving a pet as a gift increased or had no impact on their love for or attachment to that pet. And 90% of the pets were actually still in the home or remained in the home until they died. So, and then the big takeaway, just like the waived fee one, is that there was no difference in both of those groups, those that got a dog or cat as a gift and those that did not, and on whether or not they were going to be returned or on that adopter's attachment level. So remember, we're using our data, we're using facts now to create our policies and not just those one-offs, those cases that we've seen or any sort of fears that are unsubstantiated. So our 4th myth out there is landlord checks. The thought is, like, if we call a landlord, we're actually going to help increase our pet retention. So dogs and cats are less likely to get returned if we're calling landlord checks. So again, another study. This one is done by the ASPCA as well. And they looked at the difference in pet retention and what they found. And if you are part of an organization that recently got rid of landlord checks, I know we've seen it across the country, but there's no difference in pet retention after an organization has ended a strict landlord policy. And in this study, they looked at several organizations with this. And this one gets really personal because a lot of us have probably had a dog or cat in our rental property and our landlord didn't know, or we fostered that one dog or that litter of kittens and we didn't clear it with our landlord. Didn't mean that we returned them. It didn't mean that we got evicted. So we have to consider the countless number of people who are out there that find pet-friendly housing or manage to work through landlord issues on their own. So the study is really eye-opening. And as we're seeing more organizations around the country adopt a proactive or more open adoption model, we're seeing from their data as well that they're not seeing an increase of returns after they stopped calling landlords. So I think that's really interesting. So looking at the process just as a whole, so the big picture. I know when I first got the job as my very first shelter job as an adoption coordinator, and then moved to foster coordinator, I kind of viewed my job as like I was there to weed out sort of the bad eggs and to just get red flags on people and act from those. And actually my role was not that at all. My role was really coming from a better place and saying, how can I help this person coming in that's trying to do a good thing, either by fostering or adopting? How do I find a good match for them? So I got away from spending more time focusing on that sort of pass fail approval deny process, and more just saying, you know, the paper is just one piece of it, but actually the conversation is where we're really going to get to know the people that are coming into our shelter and where we can make better matches. For those that are maybe not in a place where they're ready to adopt or ready to foster, my role then would then be education. So I always feel myself as an educator. So thinking about yourself as not so much, I'm not a detective, I'm not an interrogator, I'm not trying to find the bad people and weed them out. I'm trying to find good matches with people and have more of a conversation. So policies and work. So say we know the studies are out there, we know what best practices is with adoptions, but what does it look like for my organization? Nikki will go into that a little bit more, but just as a big picture, here are the biggest examples. So no more home checks. I'm seeing a lot of organizations getting away from that, which is great. But I've also seen organizations kind of be shamed for not doing them. But really, when we look at best practice, it's not doing home checks anymore. If you think about it, it's a huge time commitment. Who has time to go to every person's home and then spend time there looking around? It also puts people on the defensive a little bit. So if you had somebody come into your house, maybe look at the dishes in your sink and look at, you know, a fence that might not be completely, you know, perfectly sound. Those things can make, it gets personal with people and it makes them feel a little bit turned off of the adoption process or the foster process. And also understanding it's just a snapshot. You know, if you are adopting a puppy out or a 2-year-old dog, there's a really good chance that, and especially for cats, that they might be around for 15, 18, 20 years even. Things happen in life, people get divorced, you know, people move, people get married, people have kids. You're just getting a little snapshot into today. You're not really seeing what that dog or cat's life is going to be like further down the line. So all that time that organizations have been spending on going to homes and driving there and doing all of these checks, that time is so much better spent on offering more post-adoption support. So whether that be over the phone, over email, or even having them come into the shelter, working on some training together if they're going through some challenges, that's a better use of time. So that post-adoption support, keeping the dog and cat in a home, making sure it's a successful integration into the home versus doing all this sort of policing before they even get to adopt. No more landlord checks. So this is a big one that people are a little bit like, ooh, I don't know. Doesn't mean that we don't talk about it. Austin is, I just saw a study, the fastest growing city in the US. Cost of living is sort of skyrocketing. So it's not uncommon to have people come to the shelter and wanting to adopt a dog, and they live in a high-rise apartment complex, or, you know, they have roommates or they're renting. That's very common with us. We have a conversation, but our role is not to police them and call their landlord and say, did you pay your pet deposit? Or did you know that blocky-headed dogs are not allowed on your lease? Our job is to educate them. So are you aware that there's breed restrictions? Are you aware if you have any weight restrictions? And putting the responsibility on the adopter or on the foster, because essentially they're taking the risk there. It's their responsibility, they're an adult, and allowing them to do that check. It's not our job to police them. So we don't need to call, we don't need to see leases. We are going to educate. If they say, yes, I rent, but my landlord said it's okay, I am going to go through with that adoption because I trust that person is going to be there and making the right decision. And then no more vet checks. So this is another one that people are a little bit weary of, but I promise you it's going to be okay. Same thing, the same approach we take with the landlord checks is we're going to do that with the vet checks. So we are going to educate. It is very important. We see parvo, we see distemper, we see some really nasty illnesses come through that are completely preventable with vaccines. But our job, we're going to close that door if we're coming from a judgmental standpoint and we'll, you know, why aren't your dogs vaccinated? Or did you know that your dog could get heartworms? But we're going to provide resources. So it could be a half sheet of all the resources you have in town, of vet clinics in town that might be low cost or easily accessible. We're also going to, you know, if they say it's an adult dog adopter and they say, well, yes, I have a vet and my dog is up to date, then we're going to take their word prepared for it. We're also weighing risk a little bit. So we might do a little bit more education and more encouragement for a puppy. Say if their puppy has never been to a vet before and they want another puppy, we know the risk is a little bit high because there's parvo, distemper. So providing the resources, allowing them to maybe go get their puppy vaccinated and come back to the shelter when their puppy is vaccinated. So we didn't say no in that situation. We gave them the resources, they got it done on their own, and then we're ready to do the adoption. But an adoption of, like, say, an indoor cat, they have an indoor cat at home, they say is vaccinated, we know our adult cat is vaccinated, the risk of them getting anything is very low. So in that case, you know, I might just have the conversation with them and then trust that everything will be okay and do the adoption or do the foster placement in that sense. So treating things case by case versus a blanket policy again. All right.
This is Nikki from the Jacksonville Humane Society, and when embracing this type of adoption process into your organization, it's might be kind of hard to think about where do I start with this. And so what we do at the Jacksonville Humane Society is we have these 3 guides to decision making, and we use this in every department, but I think it was really relevant to adoptions. So the first guide, will it produce goodwill with the individual and with the community? So when we deny adoptions for those blanket policies that Claire had talked about, it does not produce goodwill. In fact, it can cause conflict and controversy because we're saying that we know better than the people in our very own community. So that's one of the guides. The second one is it in the best interest of the animal's health and well-being? Well, here in Jacksonville, we are a no-kill community. However, in some communities that are practicing those adoption strategies where they are doing landlord checks and denying adoptions pretty regularly, there might be animals dying in those facilities because of denying of adoptions. And so when we deny an adoption in some communities, that does mean that an animal in the shelter might be losing its life because of denying the adoption. And so if we're looking big picture, is it in the best interest of the animal's health and well-being? Certainly denying adoptions, especially in those communities where animals are dying, adoptable animals are dying, then that would not be the case. And then is it in support of our mission? So we look at our mission and say, you know, is this decision that we're making, is this going to be in support of our mission, which is, it's a long statement, but essentially saving as many lives as we can in Jacksonville. And so if we were to use these 3 to deny an adoption, that would have to be a pretty significant reason that we would decide to deny an adoption. So one of the things that I came across in my career was going from having those, I mean, we had in my old facility where I used to work, we had literally had a Rolodex of every apartment complex that we could track down. And in that Rolodex was every landlord and every apartment service phone number where we would call and check. We would call landlords, and we would essentially, not only would we check on their policies, but we were actually calling and giving the name of the person who was there, that lived there, that was coming in to adopt, and making sure that that was okay. And what we realized after a period of time is you realize that that does not create a climate of trust. And that's kind of one of the main things, is that we want to trust that the people in our community do want to do the right thing. They've come to the shelter, so number one, got to give them kudos for that. They're at the shelter. So that gives you, you know, just walking in your doors, coming into the shelter or contacting a rescue, you know, that tells you even right there that they even took that initiative, that they are there to do the right thing. And so what we want to do is we want to create a climate of trust, because what we want is for them to trust us, and then for the staff and volunteers to trust the community, because we really need them. We need the community to help us save as many lives as we can. And without the feeling of trust, they're not going, the community, I recently adopted from a different shelter, and I walked in and I had literally a 20-page application, and I did not feel like I was very trusted to adopt an animal from that facility. And I know that that facility has a pretty high euthanasia rate. And so, you know, had I not understood the process, I might have been turned off of that process and actually left and got a dog somewhere else. Back to what Claire had said earlier, most people don't get their animals from shelters. And so by the very fact of them coming in the doors, then immediately we need to try to act in a climate of trust. The other thing that we want to do is we want it to be a barrier-free process. And what that means is that we're thinking of ways that we can say yes to that adopter, not ways to say no. So maybe they do have restrictions from their landlord, maybe they do have weight restrictions, and so what can we do to help them? And in some cases here at the Jacksonville Humane Society, we have called landlords for people and asked for exceptions or said, tried to come up with ways that we could get certain breeds or weights into an apartment or a rental so that we can find ways to say yes when we have somebody who's committed to a certain animal and really interested. So what can adopters become? So if we're focusing on the relationships with the community, our adopters and even potential adopters can become a lot of things for our agencies. They can become volunteers. We've turned many an adopter into a volunteer, and what agency doesn't need volunteers, right? They can be donors. They can become advocates for you. So maybe they didn't find the right match, but they can go into work the next day and tell their office mates, 20 of their office mates, hey, I didn't find the right pet for me, but if you're looking, you really should go to your local Humane Society or rescue because they were great. And the other thing that happens when we have a good relationship with people when they come into our doors is that if they do face a roadblock with their pet ownership someday, they come to us for help. They come to us for help, not necessarily to surrender, but they come to us for help so that they can help keep that pet in their home, and they're not going to come back to us for help in those situations if they don't trust us. And so one of the things that it can be really hard say you are the decision maker and you want to go ahead and start breaking down some barriers and have a more open adoption process. It is hard to get people, volunteers and staff to buy into that. And so one of the easiest ways to do that is to just start with a trial. So just maybe give yourself, your agency, say we're going to try this for 60 days, 90 days, give it a realistic time, and then say we're going to track the number of returns for the same time period last year and see if it goes up. And typically the numbers are going to show you that returns don't go up, euthanasia goes down, and so you can go back to people with facts. But by saying that you're just going to try it, people are much more likely to be willing to give something to try rather than for you to say, and tomorrow we're going to start doing something a completely different way, and I don't want to hear about it from anyone else. That typically doesn't work. But if you say that we're going to do something on a trial basis, I think people are much more likely to buy into that. The other thing that people get worried about is with switching to open adoptions is, what if there is that situation where you do have to deny it an adoption? So that's very rare for us that we would 100% just deny an adoption. However, we do have a policy and we do have steps in order for that to happen. So that is another way that you can create buy-in, because if people know that, okay, if I get into this tough situation where I'm not comfortable, this is what I can do, and I have this policy and these steps that I can follow. It's not just you open door, you must adopt anything to anyone, no matter what. That's not what open adoptions is. But when people know that there are options, if there are tough situations, that can be really helpful. And one of the things that we do on a regular basis for adoptions that we are certain about, and adoptions, maybe we're not concerned about the safety of the people or the pet, but we're just concerned about the match, is that we do offer a sleepover situation where pets can, they don't have to commit to fully adopting. They can go home for a few days and see how it works. And the pet is still property of the Jacksonville Humane Society, and we can call and check in with them on a regular basis to see how everybody is settling in and see if it's going to be a good match or not. The other thing is that everyone involved this is volunteers and staff, needs to understand why we're doing this. It's not just a unilateral decision that is being made and nothing else is being taken into consideration. if we want to save more lives, this is really one of the ingredients in that recipe is open adoptions. And it would be hard for me to imagine that staff and volunteers would not be on board with saving more lives. And the other thing we do is we celebrate our successes. We don't have those sad stories very often, but what we do have a lot of stories are successes or long-term adoptions, and we get those stories and we get testimonials from those people, those adopters, and see how, everyone was so afraid of the reactive dog in the kennel going home with kids. Well, turns out the dog was reactive in the kennel at the shelter and completely lovely and adorable in the home with the kids. And so when we have those success stories and we can share that with staff and volunteers, the more you can do that, the more likely they are to buy in. This is just one of the ways that we kind of look at when you're talking to adults and you're trying to get buy-in, and what different avenues can you go? And so there are 3 different ways that it can be looked at. And if you touch on all 3 of these for people, it's going to be a lot. You're much more likely to get the buy-in. So we first look at their hearts. I'm not going to read all of this to you. However, denying adopters puts pets at risk for longer stays in the shelter. And, what does that do? And we all know, if you're familiar with shelter life, we all know what happens when animals are in the shelter for a lengthy amount of time, and no one likes to see that or feel that. And so I think that by appealing to their hearts and using, these are just some examples, I think that's a really important part of getting people to buy in and make that change. Hands. So it's hard to deny all of these national and then local agencies where this is actually happening right now. It's at work right now, and it's successful, and all of these places, these national organizations support it. And then we've got major cities and counties all over the country where this is being successful. And so that's another way, would be another example that would be hard to argue against. And then back to what Claire had started talking about earlier, the minds, the stats are there, the studies are there. If you look at, there are 144 million pets owned in the United States on an average in 1 year, but only 6 to 8 million enter shelters. So we're not that terrible, are we? If only less than 6% end up in shelters, people aren't so bad. And so if we look at that, then that's our minds and stats and numbers are telling us that trusting the community is the right thing to do. So another one of the ways that for this to be successful is that you want to make adoptions accessible to the community. When I very first moved to Jacksonville, one of the shelters was only open until 4 o'clock during the week. And so, the average person that wants to come in and adopt is typically not going to be able to go home or get their kids from school and then be somewhere to complete the adoption process by 4 o'clock. And so making sure that you are available to people when they're available, which is for the average person, that's evenings and weekends, and that's when your adoption center needs to be open. The other thing is we need to meet adopters where they are. So that's why we have the conversations and we don't have applications, because in conversations you can find out really where are they at with their schedules, with their lives, what would be an appropriate match. Maybe they think that adolescent dog is the best option for them, but they live alone and they work 12 hours a day. So we're not going to judge them based on their schedule. We're going to figure out where they are and what would work with their schedule, and how do they have family members and friends that could help them. So maybe that adolescent dog would be great, but they just need to have that conversation, and the staff and volunteers need to not be afraid to have conversations so that we can figure out where they are and so that we can help them make the best match. And if it's not the best match in our minds, if it's the best match in their minds, and they will go above and beyond to make it work with that pet. We here at Jacksonville Humane Society, we put strays on our adoption floor. We don't put just certain dogs or cats out for adoption. We put everybody out, and sometimes people think that they're coming in we've had more than one time somebody comes in to get a puppy and they leave with a cat. So, you know, let them see everybody. And if you're having open conversations, you never know what you might get. And so I think that making sure that all of your animals are available, even the ones sometimes that aren't so pretty, you never know who that might speak to. And then you need to look at your organization and say, what is holding up this process? Are you still doing behavior assessments? Because those formal behavior assessments, sometimes those can hold animals in the system for days and days because it takes so long to get them completed. Are you letting them go home with medical conditions? If not, why not? We all know that getting out of the shelter is the best way for behavior and medical health to be positive, is to let them go home. And then make adoptions fun. It should be a fun thing for adoptions. Make it fun for your community and make it fun for your staff and volunteers. Some examples of this are public and private collaboration. We try to do as many events with our municipal shelter as possible, and it's a great way to show the community more and more pets, but also it's nice for the staff to have partnerships in their, you know, with their peers in the same area, and it's nice for them to meet and collaborate, and, you know, maybe they don't find the right pet with your organization. So if you're collaborating with another organization, you might be able to get a pet in your community a home just by collaboration. We do a lot of mobile events, and that includes the normal Petco, PetSmart, but then we're always looking for other venues too. We've done them at car dealerships, we've done them at parks out by the beach, just various places. Be creative and be open to, well, yeah, that doesn't sound like your normal adoption event venue. However, you might reach a different population of people too by exploring and kind of going out of the box for those mobile events. We always make a point to put people and pets together when we're doing anything in social media. We try to make sure we capture both people and pets in all of those pictures, because it's important, because you're here for the community as much as you are for just the pets. You're here for the people as well. And we, and you'll see some examples of this, we correlate a lot of our adoption events with existing holidays and events that are already happening. And so it's just a fun way to kind of pair those things together.
All right, we had last week a really great ringworm webinar by Monica Frienden. So if you saw some of these, they might look familiar, but just making things fun and humorous. So one of the things that we do at Awesome Pets Alive is we do adopt out cats that have ringworm that are currently in treatment. They don't have to wait till they're done with treatment to get adopted. So of course we use this also as an opportunity to have a good laugh, but also to provide education. So these are some of my favorite flyers that our cat program has put together, which is really creative. But Lord of the Ringworm, and you can see for the Lord of the Rings fans, it's the kitties with ringworms are only $9 to represent all the rings. You'll see a little bit of education on there. So not a worm at all, just a fungus, harmless, curable. So Monica always says with our cat program that it's hard to be scared of something that you're laughing at, that it's humorous. So we also have fungus fighters. So you'll see a waived fee adoption event there. All kitties with ringworm are eligible for being our fungus fighters adoption special. Also, just because you see an adoption promotion that another shelter did and you're like, darn, I wish that we thought of that first, it's okay. This is a great example of it. So the first time this special came out was in Dallas. So just because it was done in Dallas doesn't mean that other cities couldn't have jumped on the bandwagon. So it was really successful in Austin, San Antonio, Houston did it. We just changed up the flyer a little bit. So basically it was $5 adoptions for any pet, dog or cat that was over 12 inches long. It got a really big, it went viral on social media. There's some Dallas news sources that picked it up. You can see a little screenshot from the news here of an actual adoption that happened. So just having fun and just thinking outside the box a little bit. Also this too, this was for our Canine Good Citizen top dog training program that we have in Austin Pets Alive. So this last October, we waived the fee of all the dogs that were in this training program. Really just fun. And it's a good example of not only did we waive their fee, but we were able to really highlight them as school in session promotion, but we made the shelter, made the organization a fun place to be by we did a bake sale every Sunday, and then we would do a demo, a training demo for the CGC, Canine Good Citizens, and our top dogs that were in this program. So trying to make it fun. So thinking creatively, if it's hot out, you know, can you do snow cones? Can you get a food truck to come? Can you have an ice cream day? Just anything fun to just make the shelter a destination, fun place to be. Pima Animal Care Center does a great job of having coloring books and, you know, hidden gem adoption promotions, just making it fun where families want to come and it's not the sad and gloomy place to be.
This was our one of our Black Friday pet savings. So we just did this the same. This is an example of where we partnered with our municipal shelter, and we had the same special so that no matter where anyone wanted to go to adopt this particular weekend, they were going to get the same special, whether that was with us or the municipal shelter. And so, of course, you know, the day after Thanksgiving is Black Friday. Everybody knows that that's in existence, and so it seemed a natural thing for us to pair our special with that with that existing holiday. So we have Black Friday pet savings, and so we did free adoptions that whole weekend. This was something that we did last fall. This was a homecoming court. This is just one of the contestants we had, and we actually did dogs and cats with this, and each one had this little bio specific to them that we advertised on social media. And then what we did is we, if you can see where it says that you could vote, we actually let the community vote on the homecoming king and queen for the Jacksonville Humane Society, and it actually got a really good response, and we got quite a few voters. And the winner, the cat winner, actually for this particular event ended up being our longest time cat, and she ended up getting adopted the weekend that we announced that she was the homecoming queen.
So these are just a few ideas for you, and we have many more that we can share with you. So just wrapping up, we want to make sure we'll have a list of our studies that are cited, but just some resources if you're looking to adopt more of a proactive adoption model or looking to eliminate roadblocks to your foster process. These are the best resources really that we've found that are out there. There's many, but Adopters Welcome Manual, just search it and we'll make sure you have the link, but that's through HSUS. And so that's probably the most comprehensive guide that we've seen in terms of adopting this model at home. There's also some really good studies and some infographics provided by Million Cat Challenge if you go on their website. And then Maddie's Fund, of course, has some really great resources and videos about removing barriers to adoption. So just remember that you know, our organizations, we always can improve. Even if you've recently revamped your adoption process, I think it's really good just to do a check. I like to say even a monthly check, because you never know, new people come on and new adoption counselors are getting trained, you have new volunteers. So it's really good to just keep your program in check and making sure every month that you're looking through your process from the eyes of an adopter or a foster, you know, how welcoming you are. So using these resources as your guide is a big help. So this webinar, again, brought to you by American Pets Alive. Stay tuned. We'll have more webinars for you in the